I'm Tom Elridge, 51 male. I make my living with my hands, building things that are meant to last. For 30 years, I believed the same principles applied to a life, that loyalty, hard work, and a steady heart were enough to build a family that could withstand anything. I was wrong. My life didn't just fall apart, it was systematically demolished by the two people I trusted most on this earth. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For most of my life, I measured success in sweat. Every dollar I earned was a testament to early mornings, aching muscles, and the raw satisfaction of turning a blueprint into a home. I started with nothing but a hammer and a beat-up truck, working my way up from framing crews to running my own construction business. I was a builder through and through. It's what I knew and it's who I was. I believed in tangible things, solid foundations, level floors, and the unwavering strength of a promise. That belief extended to my family. Callie and I had been a team since we were barely out of our teens. We got married at 21, fueled by cheap pizza and dreams bigger than our tiny one-bedroom apartment near Poughkeepsie. In those early years, our life was a project we built together. I took every construction job I could land, roofing, siding, kitchen remodels, while she worked shifts at a local diner and put herself through nursing school at night. We were partners in the truest sense, celebrating small victories like our first decent tax return with the kind of joy most people reserve for lottery winnings. We bought a rundown house that nobody wanted and poured our souls into it. I'd come home covered in sawdust and drywall dust, and she'd be there on the porch with a glass of lemonade, and we'd talk for hours about the future we were building, one repaired wall and one paid bill at a time. The love I felt for her then was as solid as the foundations I poured. It felt permanent. My business grew, word-of-mouth recommendations led to bigger contracts, and eventually a major city development deal changed our lives. We went from carefully budgeting every grocery trip to having real financial security. That's when I bought the mansion. It was a classic brick estate in Westchester County, nestled among old-growth trees that gave it a sense of quiet permanence. It had 5 bedrooms, a sprawling garden, and a wine cellar we never used. It was more than a house. To me, it was a symbol. It was proof that all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. I paid for most of its $3.4 million price tag in cash, thinking I was handing her the keys to a dream we both shared. She called it our forever home, but something fundamental shifted the day we moved in. The woman who used to sit with me on a rickety porch seemed to get lost in those high-ceilinged rooms. Callie began to change, shedding her old life like a snake sheds its skin. She joined the local country club, then a high-society charity board. Her simple, easy smile was replaced by a carefully maintained, polished look. Our conversations shifted from our future to her wine tastings and gala events. I tried to convince myself it was just natural growth. We weren't those kids in that tiny apartment anymore. I figured I was the one who needed to adapt to catch up to her new world. But I couldn't shake the feeling of a growing distance. I tried to anchor us to the life I still cherished. Our daughter, Brandy, who is now a sharp and wonderful 23-year-old, was my tether to what felt real. On weekends, we'd ignore the sterile perfection of the mansion and just be together, watching old movies, walking the dogs, or fishing. Every Sunday, I'd drive out to Kingston to pick up my mother, Eileen, and bring her over for dinner. Callie often made excuses to be busy on those nights, a polite chill descending whenever my mother was around. She saw my family as a relic of a past she was eager to leave behind. Then there was Hank. He wasn't just my best friend, he was the brother I never had. We'd known each other since we were 20, and our friendship was built on a foundation of shared struggles and mutual respect. We helped each other build decks, coached our kids' little league teams, and sat in silence under the stars after my father passed away. At the funeral, when I was too choked with grief to speak, Hank was the one who held my mother's hand and offered her comfort. I would have trusted that man with my life, with my business, with my family. I never once suspected that the person I saw as a brother was methodically dismantling my world from the inside. Looking back, the signs were all there, like hairline cracks spidering across a wall. I just chose not to see them. Callie and Hank started spending an alarming amount of time together, citing charity, planning, and event logistics. When I'd offer to help, she'd wave me off, saying I was too exhausted from work and should just relax, and I let her. I buried myself deeper in my projects, believing that if I just provided more, worked harder, and built a bigger fortress around us, she would eventually turn back to me. The space between us and that king-sized bed grew into a canyon. We stopped sharing stories about our day and started coexisting in a polite, suffocating silence. More often than not, she'd claim she couldn't sleep and move to one of the guest rooms, leaving me alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling and wondering where our love had gone. I kept remembering a piece of advice my estranged Uncle Roy gave me when I was 17. He was the black sheep of the family, a man who wore tailored suits to Thanksgiving and drove a vintage Bentley. He once looked me square in the eye and said, "Tommy, never mistake a roof for a sanctuary. Sometimes all it does is prevent the truth from raining down on you." At the time, I thought it was just the rambling of a strange old man. But lying in that empty bed, in that grand hollow house, I finally understood. The structure of my life was about to collapse, and I was the last one to realize it. The final breakdown of my marriage wasn't a sudden, explosive event. It was a slow, creeping decay, like rot in the framework of a house that goes unnoticed until a storm hits. The distance between Callie and me had become a permanent feature of our lives. The easy laughter that once filled our home had been replaced by a tense, formal quiet. She moved through the mansion like a museum curator, more concerned with the placement of furniture than the state of our relationship. She had created a new life for herself within the walls of the one I had built for us. A life that clearly didn't have room for a husband with calloused hands and dirt under his fingernails. Her time with Hank became her primary social engagement. They were co-chairs of some charity auction, a role that apparently required daily meetings, long lunches, and late-night phone calls. When I'd ask about it, her answers were vague and dismissive. "It's just boring committee stuff, Tom. You wouldn't be interested." Hank, my best friend of 3 decades, started avoiding my calls. When we did see each other, he couldn't look me in the eye. He'd clap me on the shoulder with a hollow heartiness that felt rehearsed, ask about my latest project, and then make an excuse to leave. The easy camaraderie we once shared had evaporated, replaced by an awkwardness I couldn't decipher. I tried to bridge the gap. I suggested weekend trips, date nights at the restaurant where I'd proposed, anything to recapture a flicker of the connection we once had. Each suggestion was met with a polite refusal. She was busy, she had a prior commitment, she wasn't feeling up to it. I was a builder, a problem solver. If a joist was weak, you reinforced it. If a foundation was cracked, you repaired it. But how do you fix a marriage when one person has already mentally moved out? I felt helpless, like I was trying to patch a gaping hole with a roll of tape. My work became my only refuge. On a job site, the rules were clear. Effort produced results. In my own home, my efforts only seemed to deepen the silence. The day it all shattered was a Thursday. I'll never forget the details of that day. I was finishing a big deck extension project in Syracuse, working with expensive custom cedar planks that required precision and patience. We finished ahead of schedule and a wave of satisfaction washed over me. I decided to drive home early, a 4-hour trip with a foolishly optimistic idea in my head. On the way, I stopped at a little Italian bakery in White Plains that Callie used to love and bought a box of her favorite cannolis. I pictured us sitting on the back patio, sharing a simple dessert like we used to, maybe finding a way to talk, really talk for the first time in months. I clung to that sliver of hope all the way home. When I turned onto our long, winding driveway, the first thing I saw was Hank's Ford F-150 parked near the garage. It wasn't unusual for him to be there. He'd occasionally help me with something around the property or drop off equipment. But in that moment, a cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. The house looked different still, unnervingly quiet. No cars were passing on the road, no landscapers were working nearby. The world seemed to be holding its breath. I parked my truck, the cannoli box sitting on the passenger seat like a naive offering, and walked in through the mudroom door. The kitchen was empty. A glass of wine, half-finished, sat on the marble countertop. I called out Callie's name, no answer. Then I heard it, a sound from upstairs. It was a laugh, soft and intimate, instantly recognizable as hers. It was the same joyful, uninhibited laugh she used to have when I'd surprise her, the one that mad. The corners of her eyes crinkle. But this laugh wasn't for me. A heavy, suffocating weight settled in my chest. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, any explanation other than the one my gut was screaming at me. I didn't run up the stairs or shout in anger. My body felt like it was moving through water. Each step on the grand, curving staircase was a deliberate, agonizing effort. As I got closer to our bedroom, I heard his voice, Hank's low murmur, followed by her soft reply. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open without making a sound, and there they were, my wife and my best friend. They weren't in a passionate embrace, it was something far worse. It was casual, comfortable, familiar. It was the quiet intimacy of two people who had been doing this for a long, long time. Hank, shirtless, scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of panicked disbelief. Callie, however, didn't flinch. She remained seated on the edge of our bed, wrapped in my bathrobe, and looked directly at me. There was no shock in her eyes, no guilt, no remorse. It was a look of cold, defiant indifference. She slowly crossed her legs, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and spoke with a calmness that chilled me to the bone. "You're home early," she said, as if I had merely interrupted a casual conversation. Those 3 words broke something inside me. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the utter lack of respect, the casual cruelty of it. Hank started stammering some pathetic string of words about how it wasn't what it looked like. I didn't even register what he was saying. My focus was entirely on Callie, on the stranger sitting on my bed who wore my wife's face. I turned around without saying a word and walked back down the stairs. I didn't slam the door. I didn't punch a wall. The anger I should have felt was replaced by a profound, hollow emptiness. I went out to the garage, sat down on a stack of spare lumber and stared at the concrete floor. The past few years of my life replayed in my mind, but this time all the confusing pieces clicked into place. The endless charity meetings, the secretive phone calls, the growing emotional and physical distance. It had all been a lie. I had been living in a house I built with a woman I loved, and I had been a complete fool. That night, the box of cannolis sat untouched on the kitchen counter. By morning, it was in the trash can, and a process server was at my door with divorce papers. The morning after I found Callie and Hank together was surreal. I had spent the night in one of the guest rooms, the same one she had so often retreated to. I didn't sleep, I just lay there, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house that no longer felt like my own. When the sun came up, I expected a confrontation, a tearful confession, or at least a heated argument. Instead, I was met with chillingly efficient silence. Callie was already dressed, her makeup perfectly applied, moving about the kitchen as if it were just another ordinary morning. She poured herself a coffee and completely ignored my presence. Hank was long gone. The only evidence that the previous day had even happened was the palpable tension that hung in the air like thick smoke. I tried to speak first. Callie, we need to talk about this. She turned from the counter, her expression unreadable. There's nothing to talk about, Tom, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. Just like that, 30 years of shared history were dismissed. There was no room for discussion, no attempt at an explanation. She had already made her decision, and I was just an obstacle to be removed. Later that day, as promised, a man in a sharp suit delivered the legal documents. The speed and precision of it all told me this wasn't a spontaneous act. This had been planned, likely for months. She had been waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger, and my early arrival had simply forced her hand. I was a practical man. I knew the marriage was over. As painful as it was, my initial instinct was to handle the divorce cleanly and quietly. I suggested to my lawyer that we pursue mediation, settle things amicably, and avoid a messy public fight. I was willing to be more than fair, to give her the mansion and a generous settlement just to be done with it all and begin the process of healing. When my lawyer relayed this offer, Callie's response was a derisive laugh. Tell him this isn't one of his construction sites where he can just hammer out a deal, she had instructed her attorney. The court can decide what I'm owed. It quickly became clear that she didn't just want a divorce, she wanted to win. She wanted to dismantle my life and leave me with nothing. She hired a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney from a top Manhattan firm, a man named Marcus Donovan, who was known for his scorched-earth tactics. Donovan was everything I wasn't: slick, polished, and utterly ruthless. In our first deposition, he looked at me not as a person, but as a problem to be solved, a target to be neutralized. The legal battle that followed was a 9-month-long exercise in character assassination. Donovan and Callie constructed a narrative that was a grotesque distortion of our life together. They painted me as a volatile, emotionally neglectful, and controlling husband. My long hours on job sites, the very work that had built the life she so eagerly enjoyed, were twisted into proof of my abandonment. My frustration with her extravagant spending was presented as financial control. They dredged up a minor business dispute from a decade ago, bringing in 2 disgruntled former subcontractors to testify that I had an unmanageable temper. Every text message I had ever sent was scrutinized, every private conversation warped into something sinister. I sat in the sterile courtroom day after day, wearing a suit that felt like a costume, listening as the woman I had loved for 3 decades systematically lied about our shared past. She sat opposite me, impeccably dressed, her expression a perfect mask of serene victimhood. She never shed a single tear, not even when our own daughter, Brandy, took the stand. Brandy, loyal and brave, tried to defend me. She spoke about my character, about the father who had never missed a single one of her school plays or soccer games. She told the court how her mother had changed, how she had grown distant and cold long before the separation. Callie refused to even make eye contact with her own child. She just stared straight ahead at the judge, her resolve unshaken. Donovan's team was relentless. They subpoenaed years of my business and personal financial records, meticulously searching for any discrepancy. They highlighted a lean year during the 2008 recession to insinuate that I was hiding assets, a claim that was baseless but effectively poisoned the well. My own lawyer, a competent but ultimately outmatched local attorney, seemed to be constantly on the defensive, reacting to their attacks rather than building a case for me. I felt like I was watching a demolition in slow motion. They were taking a wrecking ball to my reputation, my integrity, and my history, and I was powerless to stop it. The most painful part was the complete erasure of the good years. The 30 years of partnership, the sacrifices we both made, the love that had once been the bedrock of my world, it was all treated as if it had never existed. In the eyes of the court, I was reduced to a one-dimensional caricature, a villain in a story Callie had expertly crafted. The judge, a man who saw dozens of these cases a month, seemed to grow weary of the proceedings. He saw a wealthy woman with a high-powered lawyer and a working-class man who had built a successful business, but was clearly out of his depth in this arena. When the final verdict came, it was swift and brutal. The mansion, its contents, and the surrounding property were awarded to her. She was also granted half of all our liquid savings and a significant portion of my retirement account. I was left with my truck, my personal tools of the trade, and the small, bleak apartment I had rented to have a place to sleep. The judgment was so one-sided it felt punitive. I wasn't just losing a wife and a home, I was being financially and emotionally gutted. I looked over at Callie as the judge read his decision. There was no flicker of triumph, no hint of sadness, there was nothing. It was the detached expression of someone who had just concluded a successful business transaction. The discovery was complete. The woman I married was gone, and in her place was a stranger who saw our life together as nothing more than an asset to be liquidated. The final day in court felt like the culmination of a slow, public execution. The judge's words echoed in the cavernous room, each one chipping away at the foundation of the life I had spent 3 decades building. The mansion was hers, the bulk of our savings hers, my future effectively cut in half. The legal investigation into my life, orchestrated by Callie and her attorney Donovan, had been a masterclass in manipulation. It wasn't about finding the truth. It was about manufacturing a version of it that served their purpose. Donovan's strategy was simple but devastatingly effective: bury me in paperwork and drown me in accusations. His team launched a forensic accounting investigation that went back 20 years. They demanded every receipt, every invoice, and every bank statement from my business. They were on a fishing expedition, hoping to find a single error, a single undeclared cash job that they could use to paint me as a financial cheat. I had always run my business honestly, but the sheer volume of their requests was designed to overwhelm and intimidate. I spent countless nights with my accountant, digging through dusty file boxes, trying to produce documents for projects I could barely remember. The Eggle fees mounted, draining the resources I needed to defend myself. In the courtroom, Donovan presented their findings with theatrical flair. He'd hold up a single out-of-context invoice from 15 years prior and question it as if he'd uncovered a vast conspiracy. He implied that the cash I used to pay for a family vacation to Florida was skimmed from the business, conveniently ignoring the bank withdrawal records that proved otherwise. He built a narrative of deception from thin air, and because he was so confident, so polished, the seeds of doubt were planted. The investigation into my character was even more insidious. They hired a private investigator to dig into my past. They interviewed former employees, neighbors, even distant relatives looking for anyone with a grudge. They found 2 men I had fired from a job site years ago for drinking. In court, these men testified that I was prone to violent outbursts and created a hostile work environment. Donovan presented their testimony as if they were credible, unbiased witnesses, rather than disgruntled ex-employees with an axe to grind. He then turned his attention to my relationship with Brandy. He subpoenaed her phone records and text messages, looking for any instance where I might have spoken negatively about Callie. He tried to frame my protective fatherly concern as an attempt to parentally alienate my adult daughter from her mother. When Brandy testified, Donovan cross-examined her with a condescending cruelty that was hard to watch. He twisted her words, trying to make her seem like a brainwashed child parroting her father's talking points. Through it all, Brandy remained poised and steadfast, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. I felt a surge of rage, not for myself, but for the fact that Callie was willing to put our daughter through this public ordeal just to gain a financial edge. The centerpiece of their case was the claim of emotional abuse. Callie took the stand and, under Donovan's gentle guidance, spun a tale of a lonely, neglected wife trapped in a gilded cage. She spoke of my obsessive work habits, my unwillingness to engage in her new social life, and my dismissive attitude toward her interests. She cried on cue, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, describing a life of quiet desperation. It was a brilliant performance. She omitted the part where I begged her to join me for dinner. The weekends I cleared my schedule hoping she'd spend time with me, and the countless times I had tried to connect with her, only to be met with indifference. The final nail in the coffin was Hank. He was called as a witness for Callie. I watched my former best friend, a man I had considered a brother, walk to the witness stand and lie under oath. He didn't admit to the affair. Instead, he portrayed himself as a concerned friend who had simply been a shoulder to cry on for a woman in distress. He testified that he had personally witnessed my short temper and controlling behavior. He spoke of times I had been dismissive of Callie at social gatherings, painting me as a boorish workaholic who didn't appreciate the sophisticated woman his wife had become. Every word was a dagger. Listening to him, I felt a profound sense of pity. He had sacrificed his integrity, his honor, and our 30-year friendship for a woman who would likely discard him as easily as she had discarded me. When the judge finally delivered his ruling, I wasn't angry, I was numb. I had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and outmatched in a game where the rules were foreign to me. I understood concrete and steel, not character assassination and legal theater. As we filed out of the courtroom, I stood alone in the grand marble hallway. Callie and Donovan walked past me, their faces triumphant. Hank was nowhere to be seen, probably already waiting in the car, a coward to the very end. Callie paused for a moment and turned to face me. Her expression was cold, victorious. She leaned in close, the scent of her expensive perfume filling the air, and whispered the words that would haunt me for months to come. "You're pathetic." Then she turned and walked away without a backward glance. In that moment, the investigation was truly over. It had never been about discovering who was right or wrong. It was an investigation to find the most effective way to break a man, and in that she had succeeded completely, or so she thought. Standing on the cold stone steps of the courthouse, the weight of my life felt condensed into the single manila envelope clutched in my hand. Inside were the legal documents that officially declared me a stranger in my own life. Everything I had built, my home, my savings, my future, had been signed away by a judge who had only seen a carefully constructed lie. Callie's parting whisper, "You're pathetic," echoed in my ears, a final, venomous blow. I watched her get into a sleek black car with her lawyer and drive away, a smug smile playing. NG on her lips. She looked like someone who had just closed a very profitable deal. I walked to the multi-level parking garage, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence. I climbed into the cab of my work truck, the one thing the court had deemed exclusively mine. The familiar smell of sawdust and stale coffee was a stark contrast to the sterile, perfumed air of the courtroom. I sat there for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I had nowhere to go. The mansion was no longer my home, and the thought of returning to the soulless, rented apartment with its bare walls and borrowed furniture felt unbearable. It was a monument to my failure. So I started driving. I didn't have a destination in mind. My only plan was to put as much distance as possible between myself and the wreckage of my life. I drove north on the I-87 past towns and landscapes that had once been the backdrop to a happy life. Every familiar exit sign felt like a fresh wound. I drove until the city lights faded in my rearview mirror and were replaced by the dense darkness of the countryside. Hours blurred together. My mind was a chaotic storm of anger, grief, and a profound, hollow emptiness. How could I have been so blind? How could I have dedicated my entire life to two people who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone? Around 10 o'clock that night, emotionally and physically exhausted, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner off Route 9. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting a lonely glow on my truck. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I killed the engine, reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, and closed my eyes. Sleep felt impossible. I was adrift, a man without an anchor. My entire identity had been tied to being a husband, a provider, a builder. Without those things, who was I? Just as I was drifting into a restless state between waking and sleeping, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up the dark cab, displaying an unknown number with a foreign country code. My first instinct was to ignore it. It was probably a wrong number, or worse, Callie calling to twist the knife a little further. I let it ring once, twice. On the third ring, for a reason I still can't explain, I answered. "Hello," my voice was hoarse. A calm, professional voice with a distinct European accent responded. "Am I speaking with Mr. Thomas Elridge?" "Who is this?" I asked, my tone wary. "My name is Simon Keller. I am calling from the Gallon Private Banking Group in Zurich, Switzerland. We have been making efforts to contact you for some time." The words made no sense. Zurich, a private bank? I was a contractor from upstate New York, not an international financier. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, ready to hang up. "Are you the nephew of the late Mr. Roy Elridge?" the man asked. The mention of my uncle's name sent a jolt through me. Uncle Roy was the ghost of our family, my father's older, estranged brother. He was a man who lived by his own rules, showing up every few years in a flashy car, handing me a crisp $100 bill for my birthday, and then vanishing again without a trace. He hadn't been seen or heard from in nearly 20 years. The family rumor was that he had made a fortune in Europe and disappeared. Yes, I answered, my voice barely a whisper. Roy was my uncle, why are you asking? Mr. Keller continued, his tone remaining perfectly level. Mr. Elridge, your uncle established a discretionary trust account with our institution many years ago. You are listed as the sole beneficiary. The account has been dormant for 15 years, and per his specific instructions, we were not to contact you until a certain legal condition was met. My heart began to pound against my ribs. What condition? The instructions were explicit. We were to wait until you were no longer legally married. The air left my lungs. I sat bolt upright in the seat, the diner's neon sign flashing red across my face. It was too bizarre, too coincidental to be real. This had to be some kind of cruel, elaborate prank. What are you talking about? I managed to say. There was a brief pause, the sound of papers rustling on the other end of the line. Mr. Elridge, as of the close of markets today, the balance of the account is $47,893,421.77. I couldn't speak. The number was so vast, so astronomical that my brain couldn't process it. $47 million. I stared out the windshield into the dark, empty parking lot. My entire life I had worked for every single penny. I had broken my body building things for other people. The number the man had just quoted was beyond comprehension. Are you still there, Mr. Elridge? Simon Keller asked gently. Barely, I croaked. He went on to explain that my uncle had been a shrewd and intensely private investor. He had liquidated his American assets decades ago and moved his capital into a complex web of offshore accounts and private equities, all protected by the formidable Swiss banking laws. The money had been growing quietly, untouched, waiting for me. I asked him why Roy would do this, why he would impose such a strange condition. Your uncle was a very perceptive man, Mr. Keller explained. He left a letter for you, which I have here, but his legal directive was clear. He did not trust your spouse. His exact words were, Tommy needs to be completely free before he can remember who he is. That phrase, remember who he is, hit me harder than the dollar amount. It was something Roy would have said. It was a lifeline thrown to me from the past, from a man I barely knew. In that moment, sitting in the dark cab of my truck at the lowest point of my life, a new plan began to form. It wasn't a plan for revenge. It wasn't about showing Callie what she had lost. It was simpler and far more important. It was a plan to survive. A plan to fly to Zurich, to uncover the truth my uncle had left for me, and to start building something new, something that was entirely my own. The flight to Zurich was a disorienting haze. Less than 48 hours after sleeping in my truck, I was sitting in a business-class seat soaring over the Atlantic. I had packed a single duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, my father's old watch, and the worn leather wallet that contained the last few dollars to my name. I felt like an imposter, a simple builder in a world of polished executives. I didn't tell anyone where I was going except for my mother and Brandy. My mother's reaction was calm, as if she always knew her eccentric brother-in-law had one last trick up his sleeve. Brandy's advice was simple and grounding. Dad, you deserve a break, but don't let this change the man you are. Zurich was exactly as I had imagined it, pristine, orderly, and exuding a quiet confidence. A driver in a dark Mercedes met me at the airport, holding a small sign with my name on it. He spoke perfect English and didn't engage in small talk, for which I was grateful. We drove through the city's immaculate streets to a grand old stone building overlooking the serene waters of Lake Zurich. The gold letters above the iron gate read, GALLEN Private Banking Group. This was real. Inside, the air smelled of old money, leather, and wood polish. I was led down a quiet, carpeted hallway to a corner office that felt more like a private study in a European castle. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, and a large window offered a breathtaking view of the lake. A distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile rose from behind a massive desk and extended his hand. Mr. Elridge, I am Simon Keller. It is a genuine pleasure to finally meet you. We have been waiting for you for a very long time. He poured 2 cups of coffee, and for the next hour he patiently walked me through the intricate financial world my Uncle Roy had built. It was a fortress of assets, protected by layers of legal structures and international banking laws. Roy hadn't just invested his money, he had made it disappear from the American system, shielding it from taxes, litigation, and prying eyes. Simon handed me a thick leather-bound folder. Inside were not only financial statements, but a series of handwritten letters from Roy, sealed and dated, with instructions that they only be given to me upon the finalization of my divorce. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. The handwriting was bold and decisive, just like I remembered him. Tommy, it began, if you're reading this, it means that woman is finally out of your life. I apologize for being blunt, but I never trusted her. I saw the ambition in her eyes the first time you brought her to a family dinner. She didn't see you, she saw a workhorse she could ride to a comfortable life. I've watched you from afar over the years. I saw the man you became, honest, hardworking, a better man than I ever managed to be. I couldn't leave my legacy to you while you were shackled to her. This money isn't a gift, it's a tool, it's freedom. Use it to build a life that is yours on your own terms. Tears welled in my eyes as I read. For 2 decades, I had believed my uncle had forgotten about me, that he was just a selfish eccentric who had abandoned his family. The truth was, he had been watching over me, planning a final act of protection. Another letter contained a journal entry he had written when I was just a boy. Tommy has his father's hands but a stronger heart. He builds things to last. I hope the world doesn't break him. The confrontation I experienced in that office wasn't with another person, it was with myself. For months, I had been defined by Callie's betrayal and the court's judgment. I had allowed her to convince me that I was pathetic, a failure. But reading my uncle's words, I was confronting the man I used to be and the man could still become. Roy hadn't just left me money, he had left me a reflection of my own worth seen through his eyes. The final document Simon slid across the desk was the fund release authorization. It transferred the full account, including ownership of a small villa in the south of France, into a new account set up in my name. I signed the paper, and with a simple stroke of a pen, my reality was irrevocably altered. The flight home was different. The man who had left New York broken and adrift was not the same man who was now returning. The pain of the divorce was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was no longer the defining feature of my existence. I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I landed at JFK, and the first thing I did was call Brandy. I told her everything. She listened patiently and then said the one thing I needed to hear. So, does this mean you're finally coming home? A week later, my new financial reality must have somehow leaked out. The first call came from Callie. Her number flashed on my screen and I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. This time I answered and said nothing. Tom, her voice was soft, hesitant, a tone I hadn't heard in years. Tom, I heard. I think I made a terrible mistake. I was angry, confused. I never stopped loving you. Maybe we could try to fix this. I listened to her desperate, transparent plea. The performance was almost believable. Callie, I said, my voice steady and calm. You didn't love me when I had nothing, and you didn't love me when I had what you thought was everything. You only love what I can provide. You want back in because my stock just went up. The man you called pathetic is gone, and you will never have a claim on the man who is left. She started to sob, a mixture of real and manufactured tears. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction. I felt nothing but a quiet finality. I forgive you, Callie, I said, but I will never be yours again. I hung up the phone. An hour later, Hank called. He left a rambling, pathetic voicemail. Tom, buddy, listen, man to man, I messed up bad. It was complicated. I should have come to you. I deleted the message before he could finish. His apology was for his own benefit, not mine. My confrontation with them was over. It hadn't happened in a courtroom or a shouting match, but in the quiet, resolute act of hanging up the phone and choosing to walk away for good. My new life was waiting, and I had no intention of letting the ghosts of my past build on my new foundation. The first sunrise I watched as a free man was from the porch of a ranch house just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I had left New York behind without a second thought. The state held too many ghosts, too many memories of a life that was no longer mine. I needed a place where the land was open and the sky was wide, a place where I could breathe again. The house I bought was nothing like the Westchester mansion. It was a simple, sturdy home with a wraparound porch, surrounded by acres of rolling hills and a few ancient oak trees. It needed work, and that's exactly why I chose it. For the next few months, I poured myself into rebuilding it. I worked from dawn until dusk, just as I always had, but this time the labor felt different. It wasn't for anyone else, it was for me. I tore out the old kitchen, laid new hardwood floors, and built a massive stone fireplace in the living room with my own hands. Every swing of the hammer, every perfectly cut board was a therapeutic act. I was not just restoring a house, I was restoring myself. The physical exertion cleared my mind, and the tangible progress I saw each day was a powerful reminder that I could still create something solid and beautiful from a state of disrepair. Brandy came to visit often, driving down from her college town on weekends. She'd sit on the porch with her guitar, strumming quietly while I worked, her presence a comforting, steady anchor. We talked more during those few months than we had in years. She told me about her dream of opening a small, independent coffee shop and bookstore. I immediately offered to give her the startup capital, but she refused. "I want to do this on my own, Dad," she said with a determined glint in her eye. "But maybe you could build the bookshelves for me." In that moment, I had never been prouder. She had my work ethic and a fierce independence that would serve her well. My mother, Eileen, also came to stay for a few weeks. I offered to buy her a new, more modern house closer to me, but she politely declined. "Thomas, my home has my memories," she said simply. "You don't need to replace things to make them better. You just need to appreciate what lasts." Her wisdom resonated deeply. I was beginning to understand that true wealth wasn't about acquisition. It was about preservation of relationships, of integrity, and of oneself. The life Callie and Hank had chosen was a distant echo, i.e., RD through the grapevine that they had married quickly and were living in the mansion, hosting the lavish parties Callie had always craved. I felt no bitterness or jealousy. Their world was hollow, built on a foundation of lies. It was a beautiful house with nothing real inside, and that was a prison of their own making. I didn't wish them harm, but I no longer carried the weight of their betrayal. My own life was becoming too full, too peaceful to leave room for that kind of poison. I found a new rhythm. I adopted a German Shepherd mix from a local shelter, a loyal companion I named Boone. He follows me everywhere, his presence a constant, silent comfort. I started volunteering with a local organization that builds accessibility ramps for disabled veterans. I wasn't a veteran myself, but I understood what it felt like to have your mobility, your freedom, taken from you. Working alongside those men, listening to their stories, and using my skills to give them a small piece of their independence back. It gave me a sense of purpose that no business contract ever could. This new purpose led to a bigger decision. I met with a team of financial advisors and lawyers, not to find ways to grow my fortune, but to find the best way to give some of it away. We established a foundation in my family's name, the Elridge Grant. Its mission is to provide financial aid and resources to single fathers navigating the aftermath of a contentious divorce. I remembered the sheer terror and hopelessness of those first few nights, sleeping in my truck, feeling utterly alone. If I could help one man land on his feet, find a stable home, and afford a good lawyer to protect his relationship with his children, then my uncle's gift would have a meaning far beyond its monetary value. Money didn't heal me. It didn't erase the scars of betrayal or magically mend my broken heart. What it did was provide a second chance. It gave me the time and space to step away from the life that had almost destroyed me and to rediscover the man I had been before the world wore me down. My worth isn't in a Swiss bank account or a property deed. It's in the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work, the sound of my daughter's laughter on the porch, and the peace that comes from building a life for the second time on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. If you're listening to this and you feel broken, if you've been betrayed or stripped of everything you thought defined you, please know this: there is a part of you that can never be taken, demolished, or repossessed. It is the core of who you are. You may have to dig through a lot of rubble to find it, but it is there. And when you find it, you protect it. You build a new life around it, one that is stronger and truer than before. You let it guide you home.